So we could be seeing OLED iPads and Macs launch in 2022, only a year after the transition to mini LED. And I'm sorry, but this makes absolutely no sense to me, and so I thought I'd break down my viewpoints and why I disagree with this report. And so without further ado, make sure to like and subscribe for the latest Apple news and rumours. Make sure to join the buttification squad, and with that being said, let's just tuck in. Right, so the source of the information is Digitimes, who has connections within the supply chain, and essentially in the report they say that a 10.9-inch iPad Air, a 12.9-inch iPad Pro, and a 17-inch MacBook Pro should be launching in 2022 with OLED. And for reference, we should see the beginning of the transition to mini LED this year. In fact, this month, we should see the first ever mini LED product, the iPad Pro, and then from there we see the MacBook Pros and the iMac possibly get this technology too. Now, there are a few interesting additional tidbits they mention. For one, the iPad Air 5 with this OLED display should be going into production at the end of 2021 for release at the beginning of 2022. But also, apparently these OLED devices will sit alongside the mini LED devices, and so Apple will be doing both these transitions at once, and also these devices will be catered towards different markets apparently. So yeah, that's the information they've pretty much given us in a nutshell. Now, weirdly enough, when it comes to iPads, this isn't the first time we're hearing about an OLED iPad coming very soon, because you might remember in the early days of the channel, of course, I covered a report by the Elec who claimed that we could see 2 iPad Pro refreshes this year, one with mini LED in the first half and one with OLED in the second half. Now, this might give you a better understanding of my issue with this leak, because as you can see, we have inconsistent timelines from different sources. We have, of course, Digitimes saying it's coming out next year, and the Elec saying it's happening this year. And I think I know why, because in the world of Apple, there are 2 different types of sources. There's one who has connections with the supply chain and what's in production, and there's another that has connections with the team in Cupertino, who of course know what Apple's plans are for release, marketing names, etc. And so what I've noticed is that guys like Digitimes and the Elec, they're great when it comes to supply chain evidence, but their timelines are all over the place, and a lot of the time, the timeframes they give us are always a year or 2 off from the actual date, and so yeah, definitely take the information with a grain of salt, especially regarding the dates they give us. In fact, Digitimes actually mentions in the report that no final decision has been made on the release schedule, and so it seems they're pretty unsure themselves. However, my second issue with OLED iPads and Macs coming out next year comes down to Apple's supply chain. They like keeping things simple because, of course, that means that A, it's of course cheaper, but B, it's more efficient. And so imagine the havoc that is created when Apple uses 3 different display technologies in the iPad and Mac lineup. I mean, let's take the iPad lineup for example. If this information is true, then we should have LCD on the budget iPad, possibly mini LED on the iPad mini, then of course OLED on the iPad Air, the 11-inch Pro should get mini LED, and then the 12.9-inch iPad Pro will have OLED. So imagine the confusion for Apple to produce all these displays. It's gonna be an absolute mess, and especially during the pandemic, Apple probably wants to simplify the supply chain, and so having OLED in the mix just doesn't make a lot of sense. And also, this confusion is not only for Apple, but the average consumer too, because imagine having to compare and understand three different display technologies, and of course Apple have their own marketing name for each. So LCD will be Liquid Retina, and then of course OLED will be Super Retina XDR, and I'm assuming Mini LED will be Liquid Retina XDR because it's a better version of LCD. And so yes, you can imagine the confusion that arises amongst the average Joes who have no idea what these fancy terms mean. Another point to consider is of course Apple's historical behavior when it comes to different display technologies, because you might notice Apple's pretty slow when it comes to adopting new standards, especially with their main lineups. For example, the iPad and Mac has always had LCD, and the iPhones only adopted OLED in 2017, which was years after Samsung introduced them on their phones. And also you might have noticed that we only got our full OLED lineup of iPhones last year. We have had OLED since 2017, and it's taken Apple 3 years to implement it across their whole range of new iPhones. And so yes, you might understand my confusion when this report says that Apple's going to be implementing 2 new display technologies for the iPad and Mac in the space of a year or 2. And this makes no sense. They've never done this before, and so why rush into things now? But guys, my issues don't even end there, because the final red flag for me with this report is the fact the first OLED product in the iPad and Mac lineup will be the mid-range iPad Air. Now, as much as I'm not on board with all this news, I do agree there is a very, very small chance that maybe the higher end products in the iPad and MacBook lineup, so the 16-inch and of course the 12.9-inch iPad Pro, those could get OLED because, as I explained in yesterday's video about Mini LED coming to the 12.9-inch iPad Pro first, Apple likes having Halo devices because they want you to spend more money and they want to upsell you to the most expensive products with the higher margins, which of course gives them the highest amounts of profit. And so because of this, I can see Apple differentiating the higher end models from the rest of the lineup using OLED. But the iPad Air doesn't really fit this bill because of course it's a mid-range tablet, and usually with the iPad Air we see it adopt a lot of the Pro features much later. For example, the big redesign we saw back in 2018 with the iPad Pro only came to the iPad Air 2 years later. And so the iPad Air being the first OLED iPad just doesn't seem very plausible. And of course, since there is no mention of the 11-inch iPad Pro, we have to assume that it won't get the OLED upgrade. And that makes zero sense because the cheaper iPad Air can't have the better OLED display than of course the 11-inch Pro. And so yes, this makes absolutely zero sense, and you can understand why I strongly disagree with this report. And so yes, to conclude on my theory, basically what I think is that these OLED iPads and Macs should be happening later in the future, possibly around 3 to 4 years after the Mini LED transition is complete. But of course I have no inside information, and so I'm just simply theorizing and breaking down these leaks. But of course I could be completely wrong, and maybe Apple is going to confuse the lineup and give us OLED as soon as next year. And so if that is the case, then you might wonder, should I wait for these OLED iPads and Macs? Now yes, I'm aware that OLED is superior to Mini LED both in brightness and contrast ratio, but keep in mind, if you keep waiting for the next big upgrade, then you will have nothing. You will not buy anything. And so I would say just buy whatever is available at the time of purchase. If you have the money, just get the best iPad or MacBook available, and also the LCD displays are pretty good as they are, and Mini LED is going to be improving upon that, so I think it's more than fine for most people, and so I would settle with these Mini LED iPads and Macs that should be launching later this year. But I am hoping my theory is right and we don't see these OLED products till much later in the future. But tell me in the comments below, are you going to wait for the huge OLED transition, or are you going to settle with Mini LED for the time being? Anyways, thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe for the latest Apple news and rumors. Make sure to join the Butterfication squad too. Check out the video here in the icon above about the iPad Pro and how Mini LED might be exclusive to the bigger size. And on that note, I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya, peeps.